Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Culinary Scene Kitchen here at Roth Living for today's class on the use and care of the Wolf Convection Steam Oven. So we want to make sure that after today you're feeling comfortable and confident to use this remarkably versatile appliance. So welcome to today's session. My name is Ben Davis. I am executive chef here at the Denver showroom for Roth Living, coming to you across this YouTube live streamed event so we can get you all up to speed on the Wolf Convection Steam Oven. So a couple things before we get started. Just want to make sure that we note these things. The link that you use to attend today's class will also in the future take you to a recorded version of this session. So should you need to revisit for any reason some of the material that's covered today, you can simply click on that same link in the future. It'll take you directly to a recorded version of today's session. So just keep that handy should you want to revisit any of this information that we cover today. Second, and this is very, very important, if you'd like to ask a question today, is as we go through to the session, you're going to need to create an account on YouTube. It's easily done right there on the YouTube screen. Just create yourself an account. Once you have that account, you can use the chat feature in the YouTube live stream, and then you can ask the question. Kelsey, who is behind the computer screen today, will relay your question directly to me, and then I will try to repeat the question and hopefully mention your name so that we can make sure that you know it's your question that's being answered, and then we'll get that question answered for you much faster than doing the write a comment and wait for us to respond to that after the fact. So if you can you have those questions ready, just create that account and then you can ask those questions. And then last but not least, there's going to be some links in the description of today's event down at the bottom below the screen, which will allow you to download a couple of documents to your computer, which I think you might find very helpful in the use of your convection steam oven. One of those links is going to be to a gourmet guide. It's a guide to all the gourmet features in your convection steam oven. Remember that the convection steam oven has over 150 programs that are built into the unit, so that if you need to know how to roast a leg of lamb or do some other things and you don't want to go through the mental gymnastics of figuring out how am I going to do it in my convection steam oven, the Gourmet Guide will help you use that feature in your oven, which is simply on-screen instructions. It'll walk you through it, telling you temperature, time, rack position, probe temperature should it be necessary. All of those things are going to be included in this Gourmet Guide. So I'd recommend that you download this for use in the future. We'll talk a little bit about the Gourmet feature as we get to the end of today's session and we start talking about the modes in your oven, but the Gourmet feature is very extensive in your oven, so you really want to have one of these, because other than that, you're going to have to literally scroll through everything on the oven itself, and that could be pretty time consuming and in some ways frustrating because you have no way of recording those things. You just have to memorize it. So this is there for you to download. We also have a nice handy sheet for those of you who like to cook different types of grains and rices and things like that. Maybe you have a rice cooker at your home and you've been using that extensively for cooking grains and rices. The nice thing about the convection steam oven is that you can use it much the same way as you would a rice cooker, a steamer. This is a chart that you can download as well, which is all the rices and grains. So everything from just straight jasmine and basmati rice all the way through wild rice, quinoa, farro, couscous, all the different things. We actually cooked some bulgur wheat today using our convection steam oven to make our tabbouleh that we have here. So you can see that it can be very versatile, save you a little counter space, get those things off your counter, use your convection steam oven. So this chart is very handy as well for downloading and knowing how to cook some of those items as well. And then the other thing I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention, you got a really nice cookbook with your steam oven, right? That cookbook has a lot of great tried and true recipes by the chefs at Sub-Zero there in Madison. So this is a great way to start. If you're a little intimidated by the oven, you don't know where to start or how to start with it. Hopefully after today you will, but this is a great place if you just want some recipes that have already been tested, already been tried out in the oven. You can use it, kind of get you familiar with how the oven cooks. There's also this placard that comes with your oven. I think this is very handy as well, because a lot of people ask us, as chefs here at the company, whether we should, how do we know, how long do we steam this vegetable or that vegetable? How about a chicken, or how do we roast this? How do we roast that? This is kind of a nice handy chart with some very basic cooking preparations on it, times, temperatures, rack positions, modes, right? We'll talk all about that. So make sure you have this handy as well. So both of these are very handy tools that you'll have. All right? So again, the questions are so important, and today's format's pretty simple. We're going to talk about how this oven goes together, the concept behind a convection steam oven, how it functions, the actual functionality of how you talk to the oven itself, how you program it, how you're able to go through one layer to another so you know exactly how you're going to be cooking something, and then you need to know how the oven will be cooking it. So we'll talk about the modes extensively. So we know the difference between convection steam and convection humid. We know the difference between just regular convection in this oven and just a steam mode. So we want to know all those baseline items. So everything you've seen here today that we will demonstrate or has been already prepared for you was made in the convection steam oven exclusively. So we did everything right there in the oven so you can get a sense of how to use it. And some of these recipes you'll find in the cookbooks provided to you by Wolf. The tabbouleh is a good example of that. So good place to start. So let's start off by talking about how the oven goes together as we talk about convection steam, just conceptually, and why we like having convection steam ovens in our kitchen, right? So most important to understand is the importance that the role of steam plays in this oven and how steam really benefits you, right? This oven is multifaceted in the sense that it can be both just a steamer, just a convection oven, or a combination oven where it uses both the benefits of steam-driven heat, right? That very moist air, right? Coupled with very hot, dry air together. When we can couple those two types of heat together, we can get the benefits of both, right? So we can benefit from steam because obviously the moisture it provides, but what we really tend to overlook a lot of times with steam is how quickly it cooks. And remember that that's because steam transfers heat much more efficiently than dry air does. Best example of that would be if you're going to cook a potato, is it faster to boil it or bake it? I think most of you would probably agree that it's much faster to boil a potato. You're going to get it done much faster. It's going to be a different texture, but it will be cooked more thoroughly, much faster in the boiling water than it would be in a hot, dry oven, right? So that shows you just how much more efficient water and steam is at transferring heat than just dry air. So we have those benefits from steam, the temperature, the moisture, and the rapidity of how quickly we cook. But obviously the benefits of dry air is it can get much hotter, so then we can have that browning and crisping and all of those attributes that we love about food that gives it the flavor and the texture and the color, quite frankly, so it looks so beautiful. We need that hot, dry air for that. So the convection steam oven marries those two items together using those combination modes in your oven. So how does the oven go together? How is it put together? And how does it do all of these things? Well, let's just talk about the very basics from the inside out. So what I have behind me here is the M series contemporary version, which has the retractable handle. So we need to power that one on, which actually extends the handle here. So we can open the oven door up and we can talk about how the oven goes together and how that heat is driven. So the heat itself, the oven is heated by two individual elements, one below the floor, one behind the back wall, always pushed with a convection fan. So remember that in this oven, there is never a mode where the fan is actually not spinning. It's always turning, right? Because it's actually helping circulate the heat and the air in the oven. Let's always remember, too, that in this oven, the heat from the oven is never provided by the actual steam itself, but simply by these two elements controlling the heat of the oven, which gives us those broad ranges of heat, right? Depending on which mode we're using, we can go from as low as 90 degrees to as high as 440 degrees in the convection mode. And when we're using just pure steam, we can only go from 90 to 210. But that 210 degrees is not being, the temperature is not provided by the steam. The humidity is only provided by the steam. The temperature is controlled by the oven itself, right? So those two elements control the heat in all cases. So that's where the heat comes from. The steam is injected through a nozzle in the ceiling of the oven. So you all know that you have a reservoir in your convection steam oven which provides the water to generate the steam. Reservoir is always located in the upper right-hand corner, right? And that's where you'll see it there. You want to fill that reservoir when you ever need to make steam. You just need to make sure you fill that reservoir from your tap, right? You don't need to add any specialized water, no demineralized, deionized, distilled. You really don't need that, right? You don't, in fact, you can't use it because it could damage your oven. And the reason we need water from the tap is because there is a certain amount of mineral content in tap water, and it's those minerals that are contained in the water that will help your oven recognize when the reservoir is empty. When the reservoir is empty and there is no water available to create steam, that will activate the sensor because the minerals will remain. It will flash on the screen that you need to add water. It will also then eject the drawer, give you an audible tone, and just remind you that you need to refill your reservoir. So you got to make sure that you're using just good tap water to power the oven, power the steam component of your oven. Should any of you own what we call a reverse osmosis whole home water filtration system, in other words, if your whole entire house has got a filtered water system that is a reverse osmosis process, that means that all minerality is stripped out of the water prior to getting to the taps in your home. You're going to need to still fill this with that water, but you're going to need to add a tablespoon or two of any form of bottled water, right? So, you know, you can put a little Evian or Perrier or Arrowhead or Fiji water. Just put a couple tablespoons in there. That's all it requires per tank, so that you know that there's some mineral content in the water, that so should you run out of water during a process, the oven will recognize there's no water, and it will pause and do whatever it needs and do all of its mechanics so that you will refill the tank without damaging the equipment, right? Because you can't make steam without water, and if it tries to boil air, right, it's going to damage the internal componentry. So make sure that if you have that reverse osmosis system, that you're adding that water to the tank. Now, that water doesn't need to be filled to any particular height. You can just fill it as much as you want. I generally fill it all the way to the top every single time I fill it. Remember, you don't have to fill it every time you're using the oven, right? It's only going to take the water that it needs to create the steam that is required in that process. So many, many times, that's just going to be just a small amount of the water out of the reservoir. So you don't need to dump that water and refill it each time. Just keep using it until you either run really low or the oven tells you need to add water. So just do it that way. You don't have to go on any kind of routine in terms of filling it, right? So every once in a while, you're going to want to clean this out. So maybe once a week or so, you take the reservoir out, you drain the water, just take it to the sink. Don't put it in the dishwasher. Sink, soapy water, just wipe out the inside of the reservoir and rinse it really well, and then refill it and pop it back in your oven. Occasionally, you will notice that when you look in the reservoir of your oven, it looks slightly cloudy. And that's because that during a steaming process, water is pumped into the boiler, right? It is actually boiled, and obviously to make the steam. But if we then boil away some of the water, but some of it remains, and we're done steaming, your oven will pump the water back into the reservoir. Well, occasionally during that process of bringing the water to a boil, we get a little bit of lime scale that builds up in your boiler that gets pumped back to the reservoir. So occasionally you'll look in your reservoir, it looks a little bit cloudy. Don't worry about that. It's not going into your food or anything like that. Obviously, that lime scale can't be transferred into the steam itself. So just know that if it looks cloudy in the water reservoir every once in a while, nothing wrong with your oven. It just means that you've been using it a lot, which is great, and then a little bit of that water has been pumped back into the reservoir, because remember, your oven does not store water in the boiler. It only stores water in the reservoir and then calls for the water when you turn it on and request it. So just keep that in mind if you notice that in the reservoir. So again, keep it, as full as you like, but it will last about a full reservoir will last for 2 to 2.5 hours of continuous 210-degree steaming. So if you're doing a lot of vegetable steaming, or maybe you're steaming a lot of chicken or seafood to make some salads or something like that, you could go for 2.5 hours, right, on that 210-degree temperature before you need to refill that reservoir. If you're steaming at lower temperatures, right, at a temperature lower than 210 degrees, that water is going to last much, much longer because it requires less water and it's evaporating much slower at lower temperatures. So because of that, you can easily get up to 10 to 12 hours on a tank of water when you're only steaming or doing a sous-vide technique. It's something about 140 degrees, 150 degrees. That water's going to last a lot longer. But remember that when you do run out of water, it will tell you, so you don't have to worry about keeping a constant eye on it. You'll know because the oven will remind you when it needs that extra water. So those are our heating elements. That's where the water comes from. Like every Wolf oven, the racks are numbered. They're always numbered from bottom to top. So 1 is always the bottom, 4 is always the top. This obviously becomes very, very critical when we talk about the different positions for what we're cooking. So some items are better in the lower part of the oven, some a little bit better in the upper part. And when you want to do 2 racks simultaneously, it'll tell you which racks are going to be ideal for that process as well. But just always remember those racks number from bottom to top. All right, now you know that with your oven, you got a set of pots or racks and pans to be used with the oven exclusively. So with your oven, you should have received at least 1 solid stainless steel tray. You will have also received a perforated stainless steel tray, and then you will have received 2 of these stainless steel wire racks, which are ideal for using your own pots and pans in the oven. And really, there's no prohibition from what type of pan you can use in this oven. It's not like a microwave where you can't use a metal pan. You can use whatever pan you like, provided it'll tolerate the amount of heat that you're throwing at it. I certainly wouldn't use a lot of plastic in here, but certainly silicone, any form of metal pans are great. Pyrex, ceramic, whatever you like is going to be just fine in the oven. So don't worry about that. Just use these pans for whenever you want, racks, excuse me, for whenever you want to use your own pots and pans. They really tend to work the very, very best, right? One of the things you notice about your pans themselves is that they are slightly different shapes on each edge. You have a more beveled edge on one side and a more upright edge on the other. When you insert this pan or the other pan into the oven, you always want to put the more beveled edge towards the back of the oven. So you're always going to insert it like that, so that beveled edge is going in first. That's just going to allow for slightly better airflow over the surface of your pan. All right, so always goes in that way. I think it's also a little bit easier to take it in or out. Both of these pans can be used as baking sheets if you're just doing some cookies or you're doing something that you just want to do a quick baking process. As long as you line this perforated pan with a little silicone mat or some parchment paper, you can easily bake on here, right? Obviously true for the solid pan, but obviously this pan is really ideally designed for all those great steaming processes, whether you're doing vegetables, seafood, things like that. Just remember that when you are doing seafood, right, if you're doing some fresh fish, some shrimp, crab legs, things like that, it's always a good idea to place the solid pan beneath the perforated pan just to catch that extra liquid that's going to come off that fish when it's been steamed. Makes your oven just a little bit easier to maintain and to take care of. So just put this underneath it, particularly when you're doing seafood. For other processes, even if you're just steaming some asparagus or something like that, it's not entirely necessary to put that there because you're going to get less water off the asparagus than you are off the fish. And it's obviously just clean water, right? So it's very easy to then wipe up after that. But with fish, I always like to put this solid pan underneath it. Now, one of the pans that's available to you as an additional purchase that you would have to make through Sub-Zero and Wolf is one of these porcelain enameled solid trays. I really like this tray. I think it transfers heat a little more intensely because of the dark color. It gets a little bit hotter, so I really like it. So you can order one of these. It's obviously very easy to find. If you go to either the Roth Living, you can call your local showroom and speak to one of the showroom consultants there and tell them that you're looking for the porcelain enamel tray for your convection steam oven, or you can go to the Sub-Zero website and purchase it from there, or some of the parts suppliers for this for the Sub-Zero and Wolf products will also have this. But I really like to use this pan. I just like the way it cooks. So I'm going to insert this pan into the oven in rack position number 2, right? Because I want to show you a quick technique here of how we're going to get the oven hot so we can cook some fresh pita bread to go along with our tagine of chicken and our tabbouleh, right? So we're going to place it in rack position number 2 because that is the ideal spot in your oven for a single tray of cooking. Whenever you're doing one tray, it's always ideally placed in rack position number 2. So, and the oven is going to tell you that. So we're going to place that in there like that. And then we're going to talk about how we talk to the oven itself. So when you turn the oven on, you do that by pressing any of the markings on the panel. Any of those markings will actually activate the oven and turn it on. When it opens up to this screen, that screen says quick start. Beneath it, you'll see the word steam. then you'll see 6 boxes working across. Each one of those boxes and its little icon contained within it represent one of the cooking modes you can access in the oven. And I like to jokingly call this the manual transmission, because you're making the decisions here. You're deciding, how do I want my oven to cook? At what temperature would I like my oven to cook? How long do I want it to do that? And at that point, you can decide whether or not you would like it to end at a very particular time, so that you can set it up so that the oven will start automatically for the time you've set and the end time you've set, so it'll be done at that exact moment that you would desire it to be done. So the quick start menu has those 6 individualized modes: steam, convection, convection steam, convection humid, reheat, and sous vide, right? All of those are your manual modes. Those are where you make the decisions. The other style of cooking in the oven is what we call the gourmet setting. Again, demarcated on that sheet that I talked about downloading, that you guys can download. The gourmet section, instead of being divided by modes, it is now divided by food categories. Within those food categories are separate food items. Each one has an associated process or multiple associated processes by which you can cook that particular item. Most important thing to know about the gourmet section is that there's some vocabulary in there that's important to understand what that vocabulary means, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we want to understand that those vocabulary terms are going to be important to understand how the oven is going to cook that particular item when you select it, right? But if we're going to use the gourmet or the quick start menu to preheat our pan, right, we're going to use the convection steam mode here to bake our pita breads. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use these arrows, the left and right arrows, to scroll over to that middle box where it says convection steam in the middle, right? First thing we're going to do is touch enter. You're going to touch that enter button a lot, so get used to it, right? Once we touch the enter button, you're always going to have this screen show up. The screen says use rack position number 2 or 1 and 3. And what that means is that for a single tray in this particular mode, rack position 2 is always ideal. But if you would like to cook 2 trays simultaneously, you can place trays in rack positions 1 and 3. So that's what it's telling you. It's also telling you that with that check mark in the middle of that rectangular box, that the oven is going to sit here and do nothing until you press the enter button one more time. Whenever you see any screen that has that check box in a box around it, it means that it's going to sit there until you get to that check box and hit enter. It won't do anything. It's just waiting for you to tell it that you acknowledge what's happening and that you're ready to move forward. So in this point, now we recognize that we are wanting to move forward to the next set of screens. And when that next screen pops up, now we're going to be given our choices as to how we're going to cook in the convection steam mode. The first choice we'll have will be how hot do we want the oven to be, and it will say set temperature, and that will be illuminating a box in the middle that has a little thermometer in it, so you'll know that that's the oven temperature that you're going to actually change. So when I touch enter, right there we see it says set temperature. We have a small countdown bar underneath it, and it says 330 degrees with the thermometer and a little F in there signifying that we're using Fahrenheit to demarcate our temperature. We want to change that temperature, so we press the word enter, and now we open up the ability to change the temperature. This is going to be true for any mode. We're going to go in, we're going to change that temperature to as hot as we can make it. I'm going to push it all the way up to 445 degrees by simply pressing down on the up arrow as it jumps up by 5-degree increments. Oops, not that bad. I hit the wrong button there for a second. Excuse me. Let's keep going. We want to get it all the way up to 445 or 440 on this one, excuse me. Once you have that, you can touch enter. Now you see you have another series of boxes. We want to go to the next box. That's duration. The duration allows you to set a time limit for how long you want the oven to operate in this mode at this temperature, right? So the duration can be anywhere from 10 seconds to 9 hours and 59 minutes. The beauty of a duration is the fact that it will tell the oven, cook for exactly this long at this temperature, and then turn yourself off, right? The duration interfaces directly with the operation of the oven. So we ever set a duration, we just want to know that that's exactly how long we want it to cook, right? The next button over from duration is the end time button, and that's when we choose an end time, and that can be anywhere to however long I am going to be cooking. So if I'm baking something for 20 minutes, right, that end time has to be at least 20 minutes in the future, but it can be up to 24 hours in the future. So now what I can do is, if I know I have a duration of 20 minutes, right, I can set my end time in for 2 hours from now, place whatever it is that needs to be baked for those 20 minutes into the oven, turn the oven on. The oven will recognize that it only needs to bake that item for 20 minutes, and then it will pause until 20 minutes before it needs to be done, and then automatically start, cook for those 20 minutes, and then turn itself off at the end of that 20-minute duration. So those two buttons, the duration button and the end button, always work together. You can't set an end time without a duration, right? You need to have a duration to set an end time. Otherwise, the oven will just start right away and then just cook for as long as it's going to take to get to that end point. If that's okay with you, you could do that, but it's really ideal to use that end time when you're using a duration setting so that it will cook to that exact moment in time. So what I've done on the very end is this button that allowed me to start the oven automatically, to turn the oven on, right? If I don't scroll all the way to the end and press the enter button to turn the oven on, the oven will pause for 15 seconds, countdown, 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 then get to the end, and then it will turn itself on automatically, right? The nice thing about this oven as opposed to a microwave is that if you open the door to check something, you don't have to restart it. It will always keep going, right? The minute you close the door back, it'll just keep right on going. It doesn't have to be restarted each time. So we're heating the oven up at that 440 degrees to get that pan super hot, right? So that we can cook our pita bread on there. So we're using convection steam in this mode, and I'm going to start with convection steam as the mode because I think you're going to find that this is the mode that you're going to probably want to use the most often because it really is combining the very best of both heating types, steam and dry air, right? So how does convection steam work, right? Well, it creates steam, obviously, by pumping the water into the boiler and injecting it into the oven, right? It has a temperature range of 180 to 440 degrees, right? But we have to remember that in a convection steam mode, there is always steam present, regardless of temperature, in the oven cavity. Between 180 and 250 degrees, you'll be able to see the steam. There will be condensation on the interior of the oven because it's not quite hot enough to completely evaporate all the water as it's cooking. But once you get above 250, you're going to look in the oven and it's going to look dry as a bone, right? You're going to say, well, that can't be any steam in there. But if you open the oven door, poof, you get a big puff of steam because it's still in there. And the minute it comes out of the oven where it's very hot into your kitchen, you're going to see it condense a little bit and you're going to see then the steam up above. Remember, don't worry. If you have really beautiful cabinet work above your convection steam oven, there isn't enough contact from the steam that's emanating from your oven to do any kind of harm to your nice cabinets above it. So don't worry about that with the steam. You don't have to be nervous about that, okay? But we have to remember that in that convection steam process, there's always steam. So it's always doing a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the work, a lot of the cooking is happening because the steam, right, is the water is doing that extra cooking, right? Remember that with convection steam as a mode, we very, very, very rarely have to preheat the oven because we want to take the benefit of the steam from the minute the food is placed into the oven and the oven is active, right? So when the oven is gone, the steam is being injected, even though it's preheating like it is now, right? It's heating up to 440 degrees. That steam is still filling the oven cavity. So if I had some potatoes in there or something like that, that steam is actually helping me soften the potatoes to cook them, you know, a little bit while the oven is getting hot. As the oven heats up, then the hot air begins to take over and it starts doing more of the heavy lifting and it starts to do the browning and the crisping. But everything was quite literally softened up by the steam that took place in the preheat cycle. So just remember that in the convection steam cycle, there's always steam present. It's always adding that moisture to your oven cavity. So you almost always want to not preheat your oven because you want to utilize the steam that's taking place while the oven is preheating. So just keep that in mind when you're using convection steam. There's a couple of exceptions to that. Mostly when you're using convection steam to get something very crispy that's very thin on the outside, like a chicken cutlet, a breaded chicken cutlet, something like that, you can actually put that item into a preheated convection steam oven, convection steam cycle. The steam is still going to help moisturize and cook that, but the crispiness is going to happen immediately because you're inserting it into a very hot oven cavity. So again, it's about 65% relative humidity when we're in the convection steam mode, right? So 65% relative humidity, that's pretty moist, right? You're going to get a lot of the benefits of steam by doing that. So convection steam, again, is a very broad range of temperature. 180 to 440 seems like a broad range. How do you apply it, right? How do you use it to cook things in your daily goings on using the convection steam oven? Well, I like to just kind of divide up that temperature range into 3 separate zones because I feel like once you kind of understand how the steam is impacting those different temperature ranges, you'll be able to use it more effectively. So if you think about temperature from 180 degrees, which is the lowest end of convection steam as a cycle, up to 275 degrees, that's a really ideal range of temperature for cooking items like a pot roast or these slow roasted chicken legs, right? Or perhaps you're doing a pork shoulder or some racks of ribs, things that normally go low and slow in your oven and a lot of moisture, a lot of liquid is in the pot or the pan, and you're slowly cooking it because you're really concerned about the texture. You don't really think about how does it look. You're more about, I really want the texture to be right. I want it to be moist. I want it to be sliceable, juicy, all of those things. Convection steam is going to help you with that because it's adding that moisture, so it's cooking it faster, right, without drying it out, right? You're not just setting it into a cavity that's just bereft of any moisture. Now we're adding moisture to it, so now that's going to help soften and cook those items to make them tender and beautiful, but at the same time it's accelerating the process because of the steam being in there, so you can cook in that lower temperature range, like I say, 180 to 275, to do those slow meats, braises, things like that. It's a great way. Don't cover anything, right? If you're cooking with convection steam, you don't want to cover it because you want the steam to be able to impact the food that you're cooking by hitting the food directly. So don't cover it, all right? The other thing that you can cook at this lower temperature using convection steam are items where you might normally use a water bath, like a custard, a flan, types of cheesecake. This Basque cheesecake doesn't require a water bath because we want it to take on that color, so it's a little bit of different style, but a traditional style, like a New York style cheesecake or something like that, you are going to probably want to use a water bath in a conventional oven at about 325 degrees. Well, in this oven, we don't need the water bath. We just use a lower temperature. We wrap that springform pan with our cheesecake in it with plastic wrap so the water doesn't hit the surface of the cheesecake directly, because it's going to be in that oven for about an hour and 15 to an hour and 30 minutes, depending on how dense it is, right? So we can place it in there at 225 degrees, right? Just above the boiling point of water, right? So we got that nice insulation from all the steam in the oven, but we're still getting 225 degrees to cook that cheesecake absolutely beautifully. So that's what we can use that low range of convection steam for doing those items as well. So if you have custard desserts, flans, different things like that, where you're just setting things, but you want it to stay nice and smooth and moist and not dry it out, then you can definitely use convection steam for that. So that's a great use of those lower temperature registers using convection steam. So now we just reached our preheat temperature. We've reached 440 degrees. I'll just give you a quick peek. When we open the door, you might see a little bit of steam across there, just kind of condensing right on the panel. So, and I can feel the moisture on my hands, right? So there's still all that steam in the oven. So that's really a great way to help make our pita bread because it keeps it nice and moist as we roll it out, right? So now we've got our pitas here that we've made. I'm going to put a little flour down on the surface and take one of these. I'm just going to roll it out. We want to roll these out about 6 to 8 inches in diameter if I don't have it all sticking to the rolling pin. And a little flour on here is okay, right? That's just fine. So if you have a pizza peel or something along those lines, it's really a great idea to use that to deposit these in the oven, right? So if you have one of the Wolf M or E series or a dual fuel oven, you might have purchased a bake stone. You get a pizza peel with that. It's really handy to do this as well. Just want to make sure it slides nicely. We're just going to pop it right onto that hot piece of metal right in there. I'll turn the light on for you So maybe you can see behind me, or we can give you a close-up on there as it's baking. But as this is baking, it's only going to take 3 minutes, right? We're only talking about 3 minutes in the oven at 440 degrees using that convection steam. What I've got ready for it is a bowl here with a piece of aluminum foil, because as the bread comes out of the oven, it's a little bit crispy on the outside. It's a little bit toughened from the heat. But if I place it in the bowl, put a little foil over it, it softens the pita, so it's nice and pliable and it doesn't get dry and brittle. So it's a great way to take care of your pita. So the next temperature range using convection steam would be the middle temperature register, which is, again, 275 to 375. And this is going to be when you're doing those unbreaded meats or fish or poultry, something like that. You're just going to roast, a pork tenderloin. You're going to do maybe, some chicken breasts, or perhaps you're going to do, a small beef roast, and you don't have a breading on it. You're not trying to get it crispy. You're not trying to make the outside crackly crispy like a chicken parmesan or something like that. You just want it to cook a little bit faster, so it's spending less time in that hot oven, but it's also getting the benefit of the steam, so it's moisturizing it. That's when you're going to use that middle temperature register, 275 to 375. You have a recipe that just says preheat your oven to 350 degrees, right? And you're thinking, well, I have this recipe, it doesn't say anything about a convection steam oven. How would I translate that recipe from my recipe at 350 in a conventional oven over to my convection steam oven? Pick a temperature somewhere in that same area. It doesn't have to be quite as hot, because one, the oven cavity is smaller, and two, you've got the steam to benefit, right? You don't need quite as much heat, because you're going to get a lot of the benefit of the true heat, because the steam has done a lot of the cooking in the preheat, and then you're getting the crisping near the end. So you don't need it to be quite as hot. It can be just as hot if you want. If you want to do 350, do 350. Just remember, it's going to cook really quickly, so make sure you set a timer for shorter amounts of time. Just make that adjustment. So if you have that recipe that calls for doing a roast or something like that using a traditional oven, but you're going to use your convection steam oven, what I want you to do is adjust that temperature down just a little bit. If you choose to, you can, but always make sure you're checking it early, because it's going to work really nicely with that. You're also probably going to want to do your temperature probe, which comes with your oven. Now, if you have more than one Wolf oven, you probably have more than one probe, right? If you have a big M-series oven like I have behind me here, that comes with a blue probe. If you have a convection steam oven like this one, you have a black probe, all right? You have to use the black probe in the convection steam oven, because it won't, even though it fits in the big oven, it won't work. It doesn't register, it doesn't read. So you're going to have to use it in the black one in your CSO, in your convection steam oven. The plug-in for the probe is on the right-hand wall as you're facing the oven. You're going to open that little trap door. You're going to plug it in. And then if you come up to your touch screen, you'll notice that just one back to the left from the temperature box is a symbol. It looks like it looks kind of like this, and then there's an F in it. That's for your temperature probe. That's how you set your probe. So once the probe is plugged into the oven, it will register automatically that there is a probe attached. You can highlight that box, and then you can go in and set the temperature anywhere from 90 to 210 degrees. So whatever it is you're cooking, right, you can just set it for that exact temperature. The oven will cook it to that exact temperature, and then it will alert you. Once it does alert you, you want to make sure you take it out. In certain instances, the oven will turn off when it reaches that internal temperature. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But many times when you're doing that middle range of convection steam, you're going to be using your temperature probe. So you're definitely going to want to do that. And there's no prohibition from using your probe in any of the modes in this oven, right? It's not like there's you're going to melt it under the broiler or something like that. That's not going to happen. You're just going to have to just make sure that you're using the probe, as effectively as possible. So we're going to check it. There, we got a little bit of color on the pita. We're just going to drop it in there, and then we'll go for the second one here. We'll just kind of do a little dance as we're going through. All right. Now, the high temperature settings between 375 and 440 is where your oven can essentially become an air fryer. And I know I'm not a big fan of the words air fry, because it's a kind of contradiction in terms, right? When we think about frying, we're really thinking about hot grease. But in this case, we can almost do that same air fry technique, which is essentially just a convection oven at a very high temperature, driving the air around the food, which is placed on a rack right, above another tray. So how do you set that up in your convection steam oven? Well, you simply take your solid pan. You're going to place this in rack position number 1. You're going to take the food and you're going to put it on the wire rack like this, right? And you're going to slide that into rack position number 2. Now, in the case of air frying, you're definitely going to want to make sure the oven has been preheated. You definitely want to put the oven, the food that you're air frying into a preheated oven. So that's where this high temperature range comes. So let's say you want to make chicken Parmesan without frying it in a pan, right? Bread your chicken cutlet the way you always would, right? But instead of then heating up a skillet or a pan on the stove, putting some olive oil in there and searing it on both sides, let's take our rack, we'll give it a quick spray with some pan spray, lay our chicken breasts right on it, preheat the oven at 440 degrees, put the other pan in rack position 1, slide your tray in when it's hot with the chicken cutlets on it, and in about 6 or 7 minutes, you have beautifully starting to crisp chicken cutlets ready to go, ready for cheese and sauce. Once you've got them after about 6 or 7 minutes at 440 degrees, all you need to do is take them out, pop the cheese and sauce on them, throw them back in the oven for another couple of minutes till the cheese melts, and there you go. You have beautiful air fried, if you will, chicken cutlets that haven't been exposed to any kind of oil or anything like that, but they're still nice and crispy and golden brown. And because we cook them using convection steam, they're just a little bit more moist because you had cooked them with that with the steam part of the convection steam setting. So that setting, that high temperature setting, 375 to 440 in the convection steam mode is ideal for that. It's ideal for roasting vegetables. If you like to do some roasted potatoes, some roasted broccoli, all of those things. Now, those items I would not preheat the oven because I want those potatoes to get that benefit of the steam all the way through the preheating process, because that's going to help soften those potatoes so that once it hits that 440 degrees, all I'm really waiting for now is the potatoes to get as crispy as they possibly can. So use that convection steam without preheating for vegetables and things like that when you want to make them golden brown and roasted. But if you're doing something that you want to air fry, you want to preheat the oven at that high temperature, use your rack, use a pan underneath it. You're going to get really nice results from that. So again, convection steam, just always remember the couple of hallmarks about it. 1, you almost never preheat. 2, you're going to always have steam present in the oven, so there's always going to be that steam doing a lot of the work of the cooking. And 3, it has those 3 individualized temperature zones, which are all good for different styles of cooking in your oven. And if you're going to make an adjustment, always adjust temperature down a little bit, but always adjust the time down a little bit when you're doing roasts, because they are going to cook faster. Or use your temperature probe, and then you don't have to worry about the time because the probe will tell you when it's done. All right, so that's a great thing to use. So that's one of those it's the combination mode that I think you're going to use most often. The 2 baseline modes that you have in your oven are steam and convection. So just steam, right? Just pure 100% humidified air up to 210 degrees Fahrenheit, as low as 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This is obviously going to be great for vegetables and seafood and all of those items where you want to cook it as delicately and as gently as possible, right? So that's what we use steam for. Remember that steam is going to be produced the minute we start the oven. So you never preheat when you're using steam. You always want to use either a perforated tray if you want to steam something in a separate, like if you wanted to add some aromatic liquids or something like that, maybe to steam some fish or something like that. You can certainly do that in a 9x13 pan with a minimal amount of that aromatic liquid in the bottom of it. Put the fish in there, something like that, or the chicken breast, and then steam it really nicely. Keeps it really moist, really succulent. Great way for cooking things to keep them super moist. I mean, if you want to make a great chicken salad, steam the chicken because it's going to be just beautiful and moist, fully cooked, right? And then you can just shred it up or chop it up and make a really lovely chicken salad. So it's a great way to do that if you want to keep your chicken salad really moist. So steam, again, is also the mode you're going to use if you want to create a defrost cycle in your oven. Now, you know your oven doesn't come with a mode that says defrost. It's not like a microwave where it says, here's the defrost button, right? There's actually a way to create your own defrost cycle. And the way you will do that is you will program the oven for steam, just straight steam. You want to pick a temperature. I like 110 degrees because 1, You're not cooking anything at 110 degrees, at least not quickly, right? But it is going to be very gentle and defrost whatever frozen item you need to defrost. So you're going to set, first you're going to set the mode by selecting the steam mode. Then you're going to select the temperature, 110 degrees. And then I like to set a duration that is easy to remember. So a number that ends in a 5 or a 0. 15 minutes is usually a good place to start because most items won't defrost quite that quickly, but at least you're not leaving it in there for an inordinately long amount of time and then you end up losing track of it. So set your oven duration to 15 minutes at 110 degrees of steam. And before you press start, I want you to press this button right here that says favorites, right? When you hit that favorites button, a whole different screen opens up. You're going to have a series of boxes along the bottom. If you've never used a favorite before, the first box is going to have a heart shape in it and a 1. And that's what it's going to open up to. You'll know that it's open because it'll have a dashed line underneath it. Once you see that, press enter. And then you have to type in a name for that particular favorite. In this case, DEF, which is handy because the letters are right in a row, would stand for defrost. And now you have a defrost setting. So what do? You've saved your defrost setting. You have your chicken breast, your pork chops, whatever it is you want to defrost. You place them on the rack or on this perforated tray. You put them in the oven. You hit favorite. If defrost is number 1, that's what it's going to pop up to. And you just highlight it, hit enter, enter. And now it's defrosting at 110 degrees with steam for 15 minutes. So that's why you want to create that defrost setting, because this really is a much better way of defrosting than using a microwave, because a microwave, you never know if it's going to defrost this part, that part, all of it, none of it. Part of it will be cooked, part of it, well, it's crazy. In this case, the steam, because it's all enveloping and completely surrounding the item that you're defrosting, it's going to defrost very evenly and very uniformly. Is it as fast as a microwave? I think it's faster because it's more consistent, right? You don't have to go in there, flip it over or set a weight or anything like that. It's just creating that beautiful environment. So that's how you want to set a defrost setting, using low temperature steam, right? That's hot. Okay. So, all right. So that low temperature for steam is great. For those of you who love to cook fish, seafood, and you want to steam it, I always recommend that when you are cooking fish and seafood, using the steam setting for beautiful, succulent, moist pieces of fresh fish and fresh seafood, you definitely want to steam them at temperatures lower than the maximum temperature of the oven. Maximum temperature in steam mode is 210. I would be much more likely to steam between 175 degrees and 200 degrees to give myself a nicer, moister, better piece of fish. So definitely I would do that when you're steaming fresh fish, is just use that slightly lower temperature. Now the other base mode you have in your oven is the convection mode. It is just hot, dry air. There is no steam whatsoever. So obviously the reservoir could be completely empty and you can use the convection mode. It's just like your big format ovens. It just drives the air with a fan, circulates it so that you get a nice dry air cavity so that you can do some browning, some crisping, some baking, whatever it might be, and get that high temperature. It goes up to 440 degrees, as low as 90 degrees. So if you want to dry something out, right, if you're essentially sort of dehydrating something, you could use the convection steam oven at one of those lower temperatures because the fan will circulate the air at a much lower temperature, so it would dehydrate. Not as well as your big oven will dehydrate, but it'll still do it. So convection, you want to remember that you have only a single fan in the back of your oven, which means it's pushing the air in a singular direction. Because of that, we want to remember that the back left-hand quadrant of our tray, when it is in convection mode, can tend to over brown just a little bit. It will get a little browner than the rest of the tray. So if there's an item that you're trying to be very particular about and have a very even finish to the entirety of it, by all means, use the convection system in your larger format oven. It's just a little bit more sophisticated and therefore will give you a slightly better result. So that's what I would recommend that you do if you're using convection. But again, it's a great way for just a quick dry air cavity preparation. You can use that convection mode. All right, so those are your other base modes. The other mode that is very confusing to a lot of people is the convection humid mode, right? What does convection humid mean? What convection humid means is that the oven, instead of making its own steam, is simply holding on to the moisture of the item that is being prepared and not releasing it into the atmosphere. So if I have an item that's very moist when it goes into the oven, a great example is this cheesecake. We used convection humid to cook this cheesecake because it retained the moisture from the cheesecake when it went into the oven. It didn't release it, so we're able to keep a more moist process while still getting a nice dark color on the surface of our cheesecake. What else would we use it for? We might use it for casseroles, muffins, quick breads, anything where you want to make sure it's fully cooked but staying moist but getting nicely browned and baked. It's a great way to roast whole poultry. So if you're going to roast a chicken, if you're going to roast a turkey in the oven, and you can roast up to a 20-pound turkey in the convection steam oven, you're going to want to use the convection humid mode. Now, the nice thing about it is you can have an empty reservoir, right, using convection humid because it's not making its own steam. It's simply retaining the moisture that was produced by the item that's being cooked in the oven. Therefore, you don't need a reservoir full of water, but when you open the door, steam is going to emanate from the oven. It's coming out, right, because there's a lot of trapped moisture in there because it came out of the food that you were preparing. So if it's an item that you want to keep nice and moist, right, because it has a lot of moisture going in, you want to definitely use that convection humid mode. And again, it has the same heat rating, temperature goes 180 to 440. Again, you can use it much the same way you would use a regular oven in terms of temperature, right? If you're baking something using convection humid, I would definitely not really lower the temperature too much because all you're really doing is retaining the moisture. You're not really concentrating the heat as much. You're just really focusing on keeping that moisture in the oven. So definitely use that convection humid for those items that you're thinking that you might dry out a little bit if they over bake or they get a little bit, too long in the oven, that kind of thing. It's going to be a great way to keep those items from going, kind of going bad on you or not coming out as well as you would like it. All right. So that's convection humid. That's another one of those individualized modes. You have a reheat mode on here, right, which is just for reheating any foods, plates of food, whatever it might be. The reheat mode is a manual mode. It's a combination mode, just like convection steam. It's going to add some steam into the oven cavity to refresh your food. So the first thing you want to remember is when you're reheating using reheat, never cover the food, right? You can just go in on an open plate. That's perfectly fine, or a bowl, whatever you might be reheating. Remember as well, you can reheat on 2 separate racks together. So if you want to do 4 plates simultaneously, put both racks in together, 1 and 3, racks positions 1 and 3. Put bowl here, on the other tray, bowl there, and then all of a sudden you can reheat 4 at the same time, because the nice thing about reheat in this mode is that it's enveloped, it's not microwave, it's not focusing, it's enveloping with the steam and then the heat to reheat the food. So it's a great way to reheat multiple plates simultaneously. It never reheats the food over 250 degrees because once you start heating food over 250 degrees, you're cooking it again, and that's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to cook the food twice, you just want to get it hot. How long will it take? You can figure, if you're doing a single or even multiple plates simultaneously, somewhere between 7 and 9 minutes total reheating time to get that plate nice and hot. Now, if you notice occasionally that there is a slight amount of moisture on the plate that was added because of the steam in the oven cavity, and you want to prevent that moisture from gathering on your plate, you have a quick trick that you can do. You're going to put your plates on the racks. What I recommend that you do is take your solid tray and turn it upside down and put it in rack position number 4, so it's like a hat. So that way the steam that's coming out of the nozzle doesn't go straight onto your plate, but actually spreads out a little bit more. You won't get as much condensation on those cold pieces of porcelain that you're reheating on, so you won't get as much water on the food that you're reheating. Now, if that's not a problem, right, if you don't mind a little extra moisture, because it's not going to, it's not going to really like make it a soup or something like that, but some people don't want that there. So just turn that thing upside down, and then you can create a little bit less steam on there, right? There's another way to reheat in your oven. If you're unsure of how long it's going to take to reheat, there's another method, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit, which is called our auto reheat mode. And in auto reheat mode, you don't have to do anything but stick the food in the oven and tell them how you want it, right? You tell the oven, I want it crispy, I want it moist, whatever it might be. But we'll get to that in a second. So that's where the reheat mode is. Again, it's the second to last button on the right, and that's how you do a reheat. Sous vide. For those of you who are really into doing sous vide cooking in a bag, cooking under a vacuum, whatever it might be, this oven provides you with a sous vide mode very similar to the same sort of environment you would have if you have a circulator on your stove with the circulator in there heating the water, circulating the water. And so you put the food in a bag and you submerge it for however long necessary to cook that item, right? You can do the same technique in the convection steam oven using that sous vide mode. It's still a steam mode. The biggest difference between steam mode and the sous vide mode is now the sous vide mode is moving the air in a slower fashion by turning the fan a little bit more slowly. It also limits the temperature range from 125 to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're only cooking between those ranges. Remember the principle behind sous vide, right? Is that the food that is being prepared can never exceed the temperature of the environment in which it is being prepared. Therefore, if you're putting a steak in a bag and you're cooking it at 135 degrees, even if you cook that steak for 4.5 hours, it will never exceed 135 degrees. If it can never exceed 135 degrees, it can never go beyond that temperature that you desire to consume it at. So if you love your steak at 135, because that's your ideal temperature for the inside of a steak, then by all means, you can sous vide it at 135, take it out, throw it into a hot cast iron skillet or onto your barbecue, whatever it might be, quickly sear the outside, and voila, perfect steak, because the middle is exactly 135 degrees, the outside is beautifully seared, and you cooked it for a very long time, but you didn't overcook it because it could never exceed that temperature. That's the principle behind sous vide and how it works. So this oven does exactly the same thing as that circulator does. You just take the time and temperature from your sous vide recipe and you apply it to the oven. Kelsey, question? So Carol is asking whether or not it is absolutely necessary to sous vide. Do you have to put it into a vacuum sealed bag? The answer to that question is no, you don't. It's preferable to use a vacuum sealed bag because you know there is no leakage then at all. There can be no leakage from the inside of the bag. However, if you don't have a vacuum sealer, you can simply use what we call the water immersion technique by placing the food that you want to sous vide into a Ziploc bag, filling a basin or a bowl with cold water, immersing the bag from the bottom up so that the water and the pressure of the water forces the air out of the top of the bag, and then you just sip it closed. And so now you've gotten as much of the water as possible out of the bag, or the air, excuse me, not the water, the air out of the bag. So now you can sous vide with that. You do not absolutely have to have a vacuum seal bag. In fact, in many cases, when we do a sous vide technique and use a vacuum sealer, we don't draw a full vacuum on there. We want to leave a little bit of air inside so that as it cooks, and there might be a little expansion of that air, right? We want it to be able to do that, but it will never, remember the principle, it can't exceed the temperature that you've set, so therefore you can't really overcook it because it'll never exceed the temperature that you desire to cook it to. So obviously this is a great method for preserving items, right? If you want to cook a bunch of chicken breasts sous vide style, right now you have some beautifully cooked chicken breasts, perfectly cooked. You can, once you've cooked them, you can refrigerate them. You can even freeze them at some point. So then all you know, you have a perfectly cooked chicken breast in that bag. All you have to do is reheat it and you've got perfectly cooked chicken for whatever you want to do. So it's a great way not only to plan ahead, but it's a great way to ensure that the food is at the temperatures that you desire, right? That it's cooked to the way you like. So again, that sous vide mode is great if you're really into it, or if you're just learning about it, it's a great way to play with it. It can be very, very forgiving. Just remember that if you have a sous vide mode that requires lengthy cooking times, and when I say lengthy, we could be talking like up to 24, 36 hours, 72 hours in the sous vide cooker. That's a long time for the water in the reservoir to last. It will last longer than the 2.5 hours that it would cook if I was just steaming vegetables. But if I'm doing something for 72 hours, you can be guaranteed I'm going to have to add water to that reservoir at some point. So just keep that in mind as you're planning to do a sous vide technique that is very lengthy, that you may have to add more water, and that might wake you up in the middle of the night to do it. But you just got to keep that in mind, that you may have to add water if it's a very long process for that particular sous vide recipe. So, but it's a great way to cook. It's a fun way to cook, fun to experiment with it. So you can do some really cool things with it. So I would recommend trying it out. If you haven't, give it a try. You don't have to make an investment. You already did. You got the oven, right? Okay. So those are all of our quick start modes where we don't have to make any, we make all the decisions. We tell the oven how we want to cook and the oven does our bidding, right? But how about those moments when we want to, we're just not feeling it. We're not that day. I don't want to figure out how to do this, blah, blah, blah. We want to use the gourmet mode. The gourmet mode here on the panel, right? Oops, I forgot the gourmet mode allows you to say, I want to cook this. How do I cook? Do you know how to cook it in the oven? I mean, what are the ways that you know how? In some cases, the gourmet modes, there are going to be multiple modes for cooking the same item, right? Chicken breast is a great example. In one case, the chicken breast in gourmet is roasted, right? So it gets much hotter. It uses the convection steam mode, gets you a nice crispy exterior on your chicken breast. The other way for cooking a chicken breast is just to steam it. So if you were making, say, a filling for crepes or maybe enchiladas or something along those lines, and you just wanted your chicken to be beautifully moist cooked, right? You could just use that mode. So there's different modes in there, different ways of cooking for different items. So when you access the gourmet setting, right, the first thing that's going to come up on the screen, you're going to see a bunch of little boxes, and the first box says vegetables. And if you press enter and enter the vegetable button or the vegetable category, the first vegetable is leaf spinach, right? That's the very first one. And if you want to cook leaf spinach, if you're making a beautiful spinach dip, or maybe you're making a casserole or something along that line where you want to pre-cook that spinach, instead of blanching it in the oven or in a boiling pot of water, you just steam it, right? So what is it going to do? It's going to steam the spinach, right? Just use pure steam at 210 degrees for 10 minutes, right? Works fantastically well. So when you're doing some prep, you're doing some advanced preparations for something, you want to just pop that spinach in the oven. 10 minutes later, you've got perfectly cooked spinach, put it into a container. Now it's ready to go for later. You don't have to buy that horrible frozen spinach, which is my least favorite vegetable on the planet. Well, no, canned peas are my least favorite vegetable on the planet. But it just goes down. So if you follow through on the oven, when you hit gourmet and you start going through vegetables, the next vegetable is cauliflower, and then broccoli, and then peas, and then fresh green beans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just follows all the way through. In each column, it tells you how the oven's going to cook it, the temperature at which it will cook it, and how long it's going to take. Now, the great part about this is that if you have a vegetable that's not on this list, right? Maybe you want to cook some turnips, right? Maybe you love turnips. You want to make a beautiful turnip puree. And you're thinking to yourself, well, let's find the turnip button. And there's no turnip button. So you think to yourself, okay, how would I normally cook that turnip to make a puree? Well, I'd probably boil it for a while so it got nice and soft and mashable and all that. Well, turnip's a lot like a beet or a carrot. So just use the beet or the carrot mode. It's not like it's going to it's not going to turn it pink or it's not going to make it orange. You're just going to steam it, right? So, but beets and carrots are much more similar to a turnip in terms of their texture. So you could just steam it using those modes without having to sit and think, oh, how long do I need to do this or this or this? So it's a great way to kind of adapt the gourmet sections. So there's lots of other ways to cook on here, and some of the things that you want to take a special note of are some of the vocabulary that you'll see included in the gourmet section. And one of those terms is more gourmet. Now, I'm trying not to confuse you all because I'm going to say the word more a lot now, and you're going to think, wait a minute, what one is he talking about? But there's actually a technique that you'll see on this sheet where the technique is the more gourmet setting, and there won't be a temperature associated with it. In fact, it'll just say during the duration, it'll just say sensor. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, what does that mean? Do I have to insert a sensor? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? No, what it's telling you is this. If you choose a gourmet feature that says more gourmet, what the oven is going to ask you is, how do you and would you like the end product to look, right? Would it be golden brown, dark brown, light brown, whatever it might be? It's going to give you some choice that you're going to make, that you're going to have to agree to. Because what it's doing is basically setting it up to say, this is what I'm cooking, right? A good example would be scallop potatoes, or in their vernacular, potato gratin, right? So I'm going to make my scallop potatoes. I'm going to make them the way I always make them. I'm going to put them into my baking dish. I'm going to put them into the oven. I'm going to select gourmet potatoes, and then I'm going to select potato gratin. Once I've done that, I have a choice. I can select either convection steam, and that's one way to cook my potato gratin, or I can select the more gourmet setting. The more gourmet setting will then ask me one question. How is medium brown, medium golden brown the way you would like them to look? If you acknowledge that and say, yeah, that sounds really nice to me. I'd like my potatoes to be nice and soft, but beautiful golden brown on the top. Now the oven knows two things. It knows, one, what you're cooking, scallop potatoes. Two, how you'd like them, potato nice and golden brown. It knows it needs one more piece of information in order to cook that dish of potatoes. It needs to know how much mass, how big is that potato. You don't have to tell it. What's going to happen is you're going to turn the oven on, right? You're going to put it in. You're going to hit enter, 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 and then you're going to hit start. The oven's going to say, it's going to give you a symbol, which is the symbol for duration, which is simply a line with an arrow and another line, and it's telling you the duration is being determined. It knows the two things it needs to know. What am I cooking? How do you like it? Now it needs to figure out the mass. So how does it do that? It starts figuring out the duration by taking a temperature in the oven. It then raises the temperature a certain number of degrees, and by calculating the time it took to go from temperature A to temperature B, that time can then be approximated to the mass of the item that you placed in the oven. So now it can basically calculate not only the time it will take to cook that, but also the temperature and the appropriate amount of steam in order to do that process. So now it does it all for you. So you don't have to do anything except tell it what you're cooking and then answer that question of how you'd like it. So anywhere here on your gourmet sheet that you see the words more gourmet, know that that's what it means. The oven's just going to ask you how would you like it to be, and you'll tell it and it'll do the rest for you. If you don't want to go that far and you want to have a little more control, if you will, over temperature or time, things like that, or even mode, you can either go back to the quick start method, or you can choose some of the other gourmet methods, which will not only tell you the mode that it's using, but the temperature and the duration that it will tell you that it will cook it in that mode. It will also tell you, and it's a rare thing, whether or not it need be preheated, right? So this way you can kind of look over this sheet, kind of get an idea of what are the different things that the oven can cook, sort of from memory, if you will. Like if you want to make a lasagna, or you're making, a vegetable gratin, or maybe you're going to do some different hard-boiled eggs, right? You want to hard-boil a bunch of eggs to make an egg salad, or make deviled eggs, right? And you're like, how do I do that? Well, you just go to the egg section and choose hard-cooked, right? And then there's a typo on here. It should be 20 minutes, not 12 minutes, but it's 20 minutes to hard-boil your eggs. And it can be any amount of eggs, up to 32 eggs at one time in your oven, right? So here we have our nice soft pita breads to go with our chicken tagine that's there, but look how beautiful and soft these are. So really nice. But so, when you have those gourmet settings, it's just great to, just use what the oven knows. Don't be ashamed to think, oh, well, the oven, I got to know how to do this. No, if the oven knows how to do it, by all means, use it, right? So one of the other gourmet sections that I really want to bring your attention to is on the last page, right? And that last page says under more gourmet, but it's really the button is the more button. And the more button is here in the lower left-hand corner. And the more button, I like to jokingly say, is the junk drawer button of the oven. In other words, we had a lot of other things we wanted to tell you that the oven could do, but there were too many to put on the panel. So we put a button that just said more, and we threw everything in there. So it's got like this hodgepodge of things, right? But one of the things you'll find underneath there is a section that says, don't let me confuse you, more gourmet, right? What that really should say is additional gourmet. So it's more additional of the gourmet feature, not more gourmet like I just described on here, but additional gourmet items. Dumb that they made it this sound like. But if you open up that window by hitting enter, you see all sorts of cool things in there. Fresh appetizers, frozen potatoes, frozen pizza, souffle, muffins, all sorts of things are in there that you might not know they're there unless you opened up that more button and then went to more gourmet. And what these are simply modes where the oven is going to ask you, oh, you must have a frozen product, right? You have some frozen tater tots, or maybe you have some frozen spanakopita to do hors d'oeuvres for a party, right? and you want to make those, you would simply select the frozen appetizer section. You don't have to tell it what kind of frozen appetizer, which means that chicken nuggets, by the way, fall under the frozen appetizer. For those of you with kids, right? That's where they fall. Frozen appetizer section. If we want to do frozen appetizers, we put our frozen appetizers on our solid tray, maybe on a little parchment paper, right? We come here, we have frozen appetizers. What does it ask me? It asks me, what did the package say for the baking time? Did it say 12 minutes? Did it say 25 minutes? Don't worry about the temperature, just worry about the time. Because then all you're going to do is select the time frame that the oven gives you the ranges for, right? It'll figure out the rest because you've told it what it needs to know. What am I making? I'm making a frozen appetizer. What did the package say? Cook it this long. Okay, it's all it needs to know. It'll do the rest. And it'll figure it out. So those are all under that more button, and then under the more gourmet button. I know if that's confusing, I apologize. I didn't name this stuff. I would have named it very differently. So frozen appetizers is underneath there. There's a souffle mode, frozen potatoes, frozen pizza. If you see a frozen pizza, that means somewhere there's a fresh pizza, and that's in the gourmet section. There's fresh pizza. So if you want to use your convection steam oven to bake a fresh pizza, then you can do that. But if you want my opinion, I would always use my bake stone in my big oven. I think I get a better product. So a lot of things buried under this, the more button and the more gourmet setting. Just a couple words to the wise. If you are baking pie and you want to choose the pie mode, which is a more gourmet technique, which is that whole sensor technique, those for double crusted pies. Don't use the pie mode to bake your pumpkin pie because it's going to try to brown the top of your pumpkin pie filling, right? You want to use it to do a double crusted pie. If you want to make a single crusted pie using the gourmet feature, go to the baked goods section under gourmet and select fruit tart. And then you'll have a nice way to do an open-faced pie. It'll bake the crust nicely, but also do your filling as well. So you want to do that for a single crusted pie. So there's lots of things under that more button that I think you're going to really want to use in the future. It makes your life a lot easier when you choose to use it. The other thing I want to point out under that same more gourmet is you have a couple of very specialized types of cooking. And for those of you who want to do some roasting of some really luxurious meats, whether it's a prime rib or it's a bone-in like saddle of pork, or maybe you're going to do a leg of lamb, or some nice veal cuts or things like that, and you want to roast them and you want to use the full capabilities of the oven so that you can tell it, this is the exact internal temperature I want, this is exactly when I want it to be done, and I want you, oven, to rest the meat for me so that when I take it out, I don't have to do anything but slice it and serve it, all right? You're going to find that under the more button, and you're going to come over here where it says slow roast, right? In my 5 years working with this oven, right, I think the slow roast mode is the most foolproof and straightforward way to slow roast really nice cuts of meat, right? Not poultry, but nice cuts of meat, lamb and pork, beef, lamb, and pork to give you really nice results. You can find these under the gourmet section, but I don't even bother with those techniques. I just go straight to slow roast and use that under that more button. And when you select slow roast, you then are asked you to called slow roast sear. And now you have your choice of different types of meat, right? I'm going to walk you through the process of doing a nice beef tenderloin, or so that you can do this in the future. So you would scroll over to where it says beef, then you'll select enter. Now you have different cuts that you can choose, right? There's about 5 or 6. We're going to choose tenderloin, which is number 2. When we press enter on that, the first thing it's going to ask us is, how do you want the inside? What's the temperature you desire for the inside of your meat? Rare, medium rare. If you're going to medium well and well, let's skip and go do something else. But let's talk about, we'll select rare so we can show you what we can change, right? We'll touch enter, tells you which rack position, always rack position 2, right? Now, right here, it shows you the probe temperature is highlighted, and for rare, they've selected 131. So maybe you're like one of those people who you really like your beef rare, right? So you want to bring it down a little bit. Or if you like it a little more done than that, you can push it upwards to 190 degrees. Please don't cook your beef tenderloin to 190 degrees. But if you want to cook your beef tenderloin to, say, a nice 128, you like it really rare, you can just move it down couple few degrees, and now your target temperature for your temperature probe is 128. So that's what you've selected. Now notice the next box, which is traditionally the temperature box, the temperature of the oven, you have no control. Remember, it's a slow roasting mode, right? So you can't control that temperature, but what you can control is the duration, the time it's going to take to cook that item. When you open up the duration button using the enter key, you see that your choice is a 2-hour window. It's 2.5 hours at the shortest roasting period, or it's 4.5 hours at the longest, right? I would recommend that if you use a slow roast mode for any type of cut, start at 3 hours and go up from there. I've found that 2.5 hours, while it will still cook it to the degree of doneness that you desire, it doesn't rest it as efficiently, and you tend to get a little more bleed out, a little more leakage when you slice it at the end. So I tend not to do that shorter amount of time. I usually start between 3 and 3.5 hours. If you have longer, you can go longer. So you select the duration of the cooking time, right? Now remember this, when you cook that roast in 3.5 hours, right, that is going to include the rest period. The oven will rest it for you. So if you would like to eat at 7:30, so long as your roast is in the oven by 4 p.m., right at 7:30, it's done. Exactly 3.5 hours later, done, rested, take it to the table, serve it, ready to go, okay? So you set that duration for whatever you need, right? I'm gonna stick with 3.5 hours. Now I can scroll to this last box, which is the end time, and I can set that end time at least 3.5 hours from 4:16 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, right, to 4:15 p.m. 24 hours in the future. Well, we're not going to let the roast sit in the oven for 24 hours, obviously. But if I wanted to serve, say, at 8:30, I could set it 8:30, right? I could move that end time up to 8:30 p.m. so that my oven knows that I would like my roast to come out exactly at 8:30. Maybe not 8:45. We'll go back a little bit. We'll go to 8:40. How's that? Perfect. Enter. So now it's ready. It knows that it's going to roast my beef tenderloin to 128 degrees, take 3.5 hours to do it, and it's going to be ready at 8:41 p.m. The beautiful thing is that at 8:41 p.m., if I'm not ready to take my roast out of the oven, slice it, and serve it, no problem. The oven will hold it for me so long as I leave it in the oven, probe inserted, for as long as I want to, right? So it can just sit there and it'll hold it at that temperature without cooling it off, without overcooking it, all of those things. So it'll allow you to set up the exact end time with the exact degree of doneness that you desire, and it will always be ready. And the beautiful thing about the slow roast mode is if I have two beautiful 3.5 pound, 4 pound beef tenderloins on my plate, on my roasting tray, it will roast them both exactly to that temperature, right? From one end to the other. There, unfortunately, for those of people who love the well done end cut, that doesn't exist in the CSO, right? You're not going to get well done on the ends. It's going to be medium rare, or rare in this case, all the way through. So just keep that in mind when you're using that slow roast setting in the more button, right? It's a great way for doing those really nice prime cuts. You'll see there's a lot of different cuts in there. It's listed on your gourmet sheet, so you can have a look and see what it does for cooking those really nice cuts. So I would encourage all of you, use the gourmet features a lot. They're fantastic. And when you get into some of the more nuanced things, you can always check your cookbook for some more details on those for like baking bread and things like that. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about maintaining this item, but it's very easy to do. The first thing you're always going to want to remember to do is that when you're ready to clean the oven, right? It's a self-cleaning oven in the sense that it's always refreshing the walls with steam, with fresh steam. So what do you want to do to clean it? You're done using it. First thing you might want to do is remove, obviously, all the trays from the oven. Right? You want to take those out. You're going to want to take these side racks out by simply unscrewing this little gnarled screw right here, taking that out, taking those two side racks out. Once those racks are out, those racks can be run through the dishwasher. They're just stainless steel, so they can easily tolerate the dishwasher. Don't run the nuts through there. You just don't want to lose them, right? Then once you've got those racks out, I want you to set the oven closed, and I want you to run steam, just pure steam at 210 degrees for about 15 minutes. Give it a good heavy dose of steam. It's going to get a lot of nice moisture in the oven. It's going to, kind of rinse the walls a little bit, but it's going to loosen. If there's any grease or food particles stuck to it, it's going to loosen it just a little bit to help clean it. Then what are you going to do? All right, this is the beauty of this oven. You're going to open the oven completely. The oven door is going to be completely down flat, 90 degrees to the front of the oven. At the back of the oven door, at both of the hinges, you'll see two small metal clips that are pulled from the back towards the front, so they point out at about a 45-degree angle away from the oven itself. I want you to lift the oven door until it stops against the clips. It'll stop naturally, just like this. You definitely have to pick it up, the oven door, to do this process. Once you've got it up like this, you're going to grip the oven door firmly by the sides, lift up and straight out. So now the oven door is easily removed. So for even vertically challenged people such as myself, right, where I need to get to the back of the oven to clean it, I can easily reach it without having to reach across the door and bruise my rib cage reaching across that oven door. So once you've got that oven door off, right, you're going to have a lot of residual water in here from running the steam. I want you to take the Barkeeper's Friend. This is my choice for cleaning it. Just take the Barkeeper's Friend and any one of these applicators. You can use either a blue or pink Scotch-Brite pad, right? Don't use the green one, please. Just use the blue or pink one. You could use a Scrub Daddy, right? Any color that you desire, or you can use the Scrub Mommy, which has a little bit of a sponge on the back. But either one of these are fine. These won't scratch either. Or if you prefer, you can use a magic eraser as well. All of these will work. You're going to take some of your Barkeeper's Friend. You're going to sprinkle a small amount here in the center where there is guaranteed to be a certain amount of water there. You're going to make a light paste with that, and then you're just going to scrub the entire interior using one of those applicators around the entirety of the inside. You don't have to do this every single time you clean it, only when it really needs to be cleaned. It might be once every other week. It might be once a week, depending on how you're using it and how often you're using it. But once you've scrubbed it clean, take a nice, clean, damp towel, wipe out the residual cleanser, right? Get it all off of there. Now you need to put the oven door back on, all right? It's got to go on the exact same way it came off. Grip it. It goes on at an angle. Don't try to do it down. Just go up from the top, align the holes, just put it in. You'll feel it click. And now you extend it downwards. Flip the clips back in the reverse direction. And now you're locked and loaded and ready to go, and you're ready to cook. If you want to do a quick refreshing steam, sometimes I do like a couple of minutes of fresh steam just to get it nicely, kind of just make sure it's nicely rinsed, if you will. Once you've run that 2 minutes of steam, open the oven door. At this point, you don't have to take it off. Just take your clean towel, wipe out any residual water, and make sure that you don't close up the front of the oven until there's no residual water in the cavity, all right? If you feel like it needs to dry out a little bit, you can put it in this resting position like that, and that'll allow the oven to dry out just a little bit so you don't have any standing water or any residual water on the walls, okay? So that's a great way to clean your oven. That's all you need to do for the interior. On usually about an annual basis, you're gonna need to run a descaling solution through there. You're going to need this product. It's called Durgol Swiss Steamer Descaling Solution. It's available from your Roth showroom, wherever you are, or you can order it on the internet, obviously, or you can, local parts dealers that stock Sub-Zero Wolf product, you can get it from them as well. You're going to need an entire bottle of this. On an average basis, you're going to have to descale maybe once every 9 to 15 months. It just depends on how frequently you use your item and then how hard your water is. If you have very, very hard water, even with the water setting in your settings button set at the hardest level, you still may have to descale more frequently if you have very hard water. What it'll do is when it requires descaling, it will give you a notification here. It will ask you to descale. What you'll do is you'll empty any water out of the reservoir. You'll pour the entire contents of the bottle in this box into the reservoir, insert the reservoir, hit enter. It will run the descaling process. It'll take about 30 minutes. Once it's done with that, you'll discard a used solution down the drain. You'll add 2 full reservoirs, one after the other. and rinse the system, and then you're done. The beautiful thing about this is if you're in the middle of cooking on a very busy day, or you're having a dinner party or something like that, and all of a sudden the descaling notification comes up, you can skip it, right? You can skip it until you have time. So you're not forced into doing it. You're not prohibited from using the oven when that happens. You can simply skip it until the future time when you have the time to do your descaling. But that's all it's going to take to clean out the inside. Really, really easy. If you need to make any changes to the control of the item, you're going to hit that settings button, which again is right here in between the timer and the light button, right? You're going to hit that settings button. It'll allow you to change tones, brightness of the panel. You can set your water hardness. For most people in municipal areas, the water hardness is a medium. If you live in a rural area with an artisan well, you'll probably want to do hard water. And obviously, if you have a whole home water softener, you would obviously set for soft, right? And all that's going to do is change the frequency of your descaling. It's not going to change the performance of the unit at all. It's just going to change how frequently you'll descale the product. So that's a very, 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 even in an hour and 25 minutes, that's a very brief overview of what this oven can do. We haven't talked about spa mode, sanitize mode, all of these things, but one of the great resources that you as Roth Living customers here in our region, in our territory, have is that you have access to the culinary scene. Currently, all of our videos are on our YouTube channel, which is a Roth Living YouTube channel, but you will find a great amount of content there currently. But in the very, very near future, and when I say near future, I'm thinking in terms of weeks here, we will relaunch our website with a relaunched culinary scene, which will have an enormous quantity of video, use and care videos, in addition to recipe videos, many of which deal with the convection steam oven. So you can get some of those nice tutorials if you're unsure about how to do something, or if you want to see a recipe of one of the chefs is prepared. That's all going to become available to you very, very soon. And I think you'll find that this will be an invaluable resource, particularly for the use of such a powerhouse of an appliance as the convection steam oven. So we just scratched the surface a little bit today. I'm hoping that it's going to be helpful and beneficial to all of you in the use and the care of your convection steam oven. But in the future, should you need any more information about the use of all Sub-Zero Wolf and Cove appliances, you can always come back and see us here at the culinary scene. And we look forward to seeing you here again very, very soon. So thanks and have a wonderful evening.